Jet fuel has a way of sinking into your pores, outlasting any soap or scrub. Claire smelled like JPA8 and stale coffee, the scent of a woman the Air Force forgot. To the hotshots, she was just the simulator tech. To the sky, she was a ghost waiting for a body. The simulator building at Nellis Air Force Base was a windowless concrete bunker that always smelled of ozone and floor wax. It was the place where egos went to die, though most of the young lieutenants and captains passing through its doors hadn't figured that out yet. They strutted in with their flight suits zipped down to their sternums, sunglasses hanging from their collars, heads full of Top Gun fantasies, and a desperate need to prove they were the apex predators of the Nevada sky. Claire watched them from behind a bank of glowing monitors in the control booth. She didn't say much. She hadn't said much in 5 years. At 38, Claire Danvers was practically a fossil in fighter pilot years, though she wore her age quietly. Her brown hair was scraped back into a merciless bun. Her uniform was regulation, ironed flat, devoid of the colorful morale patches the kids liked to wear. She walked with a slight, almost imperceptible drag in her left leg, a souvenir from a bad day over a desert most of these kids couldn't point to on a map. To the squadron, she was just ma'am, the civilian contractor, the button pusher, the quiet woman who handed out the grading sheets and made sure the software didn't crash while they practiced pulling virtual G's in the $30 million metal pods. Today's problem was a captain named Liam Henderson. Call sign, Whip. Whip was good. Claire could see it in the telemetric data scrolling across her screens. He had hands like a surgeon and the reaction time of a coiled snake. He was also an arrogant prick. "All right, Control," Whip's voice crackled over the intercom, dripping with the lazy drawl that fighter pilots spent years perfecting. "Put us in the box. Let's get this over with. I've got a tea time at 1400. In the pod next to Whip's, his wingman, a nervous first lieutenant named Davis, keyed his mic. "2 is green. Ready, Whip." Claire sat in the dim light of the booth. She tapped her headset. "Copy. 1. Loading scenario Bravo 9er. 4 hostile contacts. Staggered altitude. You are cleared hot." She hit the spacebar. The simulation plunged them into a chaotic, digitized airspace. Claire leaned back, watching the tactical display. The green triangles were Whip and Davis. The red diamonds were the aggressors. Within 2 minutes, Whip was completely off the leash. He pushed his throttle to the firewall, leaving Davis trailing in his wake. Whip was hungry for the kill, chasing a red diamond down to the deck, bleeding his energy to get a radar lock. He was tunnel-visioned. He didn't see the second red diamond flanking him from a high-angle offset. Claire hovered her finger over the comms button. She hesitated. The manual said she was just supposed to run the program, let them fail, let the debrief handle it. But the instinct to save a pilot ran deep in her marrow. She pressed the button. "Whip, Control, you're overextending. Bandit low on your right. Pull up and drag him back to your wingman." "I got him. Control. Stay off the net," Whip snapped back. Claire released the button. She didn't argue. Yelling was for people who still believed they could change someone's mind. She simply watched the screen. Whip got his lock. "Fox 3, he announced smugly, mimicking the launch of an AMRAAM missile. The first red diamond blinked out of existence. Simultaneously, the flanking aggressor slid perfectly into the massive hole Whip had left in his defense. The aggressor didn't go for Whip. It went for the slower, isolated wingman. "Warning!" The automated voice in Davis's cockpit blared, echoing through Claire's headset. Missile launch! Missile launch! Whip! I'm painted! Davis yelled, his breathing ragged. Defend! 2! Break right! Whip commanded, realizing his mistake too late. He tried to pull his jet around, pulling virtual G-forces that would have snapped his neck in the real world. But the physics engine of the simulator was unforgiving. On Claire's screen, Davis's green triangle flashed red, then disappeared. Dead. 10 seconds later, the aggressor locked onto Whip. A second later, Whip was dead, too. Claire reached forward and flipped the master switch, cutting the power to the pods. The hydraulic hissing died down. The heavy metal doors of the simulators hissed open. Whip climbed out, ripping his helmet off. His face flushed. Davis looked like he wanted to throw up. Claire walked out of the booth, holding a clipboard with the dot matrix printouts of their flight paths. She stood at the bottom of the metal stairs as Whip descended. "Your simulation is glitching," Whip said, pointing a finger at her. That second bandit spawned out of nowhere. The radar cross-section was totally off. Claire looked at him. Her face was a blank slate. She didn't look angry or sympathetic or even annoyed. She just looked tired. "The simulation didn't glitch, Captain," she said, her voice quiet, gravelly. "You fixated. You left your wingman unprotected to chase a low-percentage shot. You got him killed, then you died." She held out the clipboard. Whip snatched it from her hand. "I had the kill," Whip muttered, glaring at the paper. "In combat, that's a trade. 1 for 1. Claire's eyes went cold. It was a subtle shift, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "In combat," she said softly, "you don't trade your wingman. You bring him home, or you don't come home at all." Whip scoffed, turning to Davis. "Come on, let's go review the tapes. The telemetry in this antique is garbage anyway." They walked past her. Davis offered a meek, apologetic nod, but Whip didn't look back. On his way out, Whip tossed his empty coffee cup into a trash can near the door. It bounced off the rim and spilled across the linoleum. He kept walking. Claire stood there for a long time. She looked at the spilled coffee. She looked at the empty, silent simulator pods. She turned and walked to the window at the far end of the hallway, looking out over the flight line. The Nevada heat shimmered off the tarmac. 2 F-35s roared down the runway, their afterburners tearing the sky in half. A violent, beautiful sound that vibrated right through the concrete and into Claire's chest. She pressed her hand against the reinforced glass. Her knuckles were white. 2 weeks later, the atmosphere on the base grew thick with tension. Red flag was approaching. The Air Force's premier air-to-air combat training exercise. Squadrons from all over the world were flying in. The skies over the Nevada test and training range were going to be a crowded, chaotic mess of mock dogfights, electronic warfare, and simulated surface-to-air missile threats. Whip's squadron, the 421st Black Widows, was slated to lead the primary strike package. But there was a problem. The aggressor squadron, the guys paid to play the bad guys, had introduced a new tactic. It was a nasty piece of maneuvering, born from modern electronic warfare. They were using terrain masking to hide from radar, popping up only long enough to launch, and then diving back into the radar clutter of the mountains. They called it the Gorge Ambush. For 3 days, Whip had been leading his flight into the simulators and the actual sky, and for 3 days they had been slaughtered. It was 1900 hours on a Thursday. The briefing room was empty except for Whip. The air smelled of stale sweat dry erase markers, and defeat. Whip stood in front of a massive whiteboard, staring at a chaotic web of red and blue lines. He had a black marker in his hand, uncapped, drying out. He rubbed his temples. If I push high, he thought, tracing a line, the SAM sites paint me. If I stay low, the aggressors jump us from above. There's no angle. It's a rigged scenario. The door creaked open. Claire walked in. She was carrying a gray plastic trash bin and a rag. She was doing the evening rounds, emptying the bins before the cleaning crew arrived. It wasn't officially her job, but she liked the quiet of the empty building. Whip didn't even turn around. "I'm still working. Come back later." Claire ignored him. She walked to the corner, emptied the paper recycling into her bin, and began wiping down the coffee station. Whip sighed loudly, a dramatic performance of frustration. "It's a broken scenario. You can't bleed energy in the valley without stalling, and you can't climb without getting locked." He was talking to himself, really, but the sound filled the quiet room. Claire stopped wiping the counter. She looked at the back of Whip's head, then up at the whiteboard. The lines were a mess of aggressive, panicked geometry. She walked over to the board. Whip finally turned, frowning. "Look, I said I need the room. Can you—" Claire didn't look at him. She reached out and took the black marker from his hand. Her grip was firm, her fingers calloused. Whip blinked, stunned into silence. Claire stood before the board. She stared at the topography map drawn in the center. Then she began to draw. She didn't hesitate. Her strokes were fluid, precise, and entirely unorthodox. She drew a blue line entering the gorge low, practically in the dirt. But instead of wrapping around the mountain to chase the aggressor, which was what Whip had been trying to do, she drew a sharp, violently steep vertical line right at the point of the ambush. "You're popping up?" Whip asked, his tone shifting from annoyed to incredulous. "You're just serving yourself on a platter to the SAMs." Claire kept drawing. At the apex of the vertical climb, she drew a harsh hook, a stall maneuver, deliberately bleeding all airspeed. "You're dead," Whip said, shaking his head. "You stall out there, you're a brick. The aggressor will blow right past you, turn, and gun you down." Claire finally spoke. Her voice was a low rasp in the quiet room. "The aggressor is carrying too much kinetic energy. He's anticipating a horizontal turn fight. When you go vertical and kill your speed, he overshoots." She drew a red line rocketing past the stalled blue line. Then she drew the blue line dropping its nose, gravity feeding the airspeed back into the jet, sliding perfectly onto the red line's tail. "You fall right into his 6 o'clock, she murmured. "You take the shot, then you dive back into the radar clutter before the SAMs complete their lock sequence. You have a 4-second window." Whip stared at the board. The math was insane. The margins were microscopic. "That's suicide," he breathed. "No computer would ever recommend that. The fly-by-wire system would fight you the whole way up. You'd have to override the safety limiters." "Yes," Claire said simply. She capped the marker and set it on the tray. "You have to fly the jet, Captain, not the computer." She picked up her trash bin and walked toward the door. "Hey," Whip called out. He wasn't arrogant now. He sounded confused, shaken. "Who taught you that? Where did you read that?" Claire paused with her hand on the door handle. She didn't look back. "I didn't read it. I lived it." The door clicked shut behind her. Whip stood in the briefing room for another hour. He ran the math in his head. He drew the angles again. It worked. It was terrifying. It required a pilot with absolute ice in their veins. But it worked. The next morning, Whip didn't go to the flight line. He went to the base administration office. The archivist, a tired master sergeant, looked at him over his reading glasses. "Can I help you, Captain?" "I need the service jacket for a civilian contractor," Whip said, leaning on the counter. "Claire Danvers runs the Sim building." The sergeant frowned. "Sir, I can't just hand over personnel files. Privacy Act." "I'm flight lead for the 421st, Whip lied smoothly. "She's integrating with our tactical training. I need to know her background to properly assess her Sim parameters." The sergeant sighed, tapped on his keyboard for a minute, and then frowned deeper. "That's weird." "What?" "Her file isn't civilian. She's still technically active duty. Medical hold. Indefinite." The sergeant clicked a few more times. "Major Claire Danvers, call sign Wraith." Whip felt the air leave his lungs. Wraith. Every fighter pilot in the Air Force knew the ghost stories. 7 years ago, during a highly classified coalition strike in hostile territory, a bomber had taken catastrophic damage. Its escort had been wiped out. A single F-22 had stayed behind, bingo on fuel, fighting off 6 enemy interceptors to buy the crippled bomber time to reach friendly airspace. The pilot had splashed 3, forced 2 to bug out, and deliberately rammed the final one when her missiles ran dry. She ejected at Mach 1.2. The sheer violence of the ejection at that speed had shattered 3 vertebrae. She was supposed to be paralyzed. She was certainly never supposed to fly again. "Print it," Whip said, his voice strangely hollow. 10 minutes later, Whip sat in his car in the blazing Nevada sun, a manila folder in his lap. He read the citations. The Distinguished Flying Cross, the Silver Star. He read the medical reports, the surgeries, the grueling physical therapy just to be able to walk. He thought about the spilled coffee cup he had thrown at her garbage can. He thought about telling her the simulation was glitching. He thought about telling her she didn't know what combat was. Whip closed the folder. He looked out through the windshield toward the sky. It suddenly looked a lot bigger, and he felt a whole lot smaller. The flight line at 0500 hours was an assault on the senses. The air tasted of unburnt jet fuel and cold desert dust. Floodlights cut harsh arcs across the concrete, illuminating the maintenance crews swarming over the gray fuselages of the F-22s. Auxiliary power units screamed a high-pitched metallic whine that vibrated deep in the teeth. Claire loved it. The smell of JP-8 was burned into her neurochemistry. She stood in the shadows of Hangar 4, wearing her standard civilian khakis. She watched a crew swap out a blown tire on a landing gear strut. Footsteps approached from behind. Heavy, the rhythmic thud of combat boots. "You're out of your lane, Captain Henderson," she said, without turning. Whip stopped beside her. He wore standard fatigues, his hands clasped behind his back. The arrogant slouch was gone. He looked gutted. He had dark, bruised bags under his eyes, like a man who had spent 3 days staring at a radar screen that kept telling him he was dead. "Davis snapped his collarbone," Whip said. His voice was flat. "Wrecked his dirt bike last night. He's grounded for 6 weeks. Miller's in bed with a stomach bug. The secondary bench is tapped out." He stepped closer. "We drop into the final red flag scenario in 4 hours. It's the Gorge ambush again. If we fail today, Colonel Hayes pulls our combat-ready certification. The whole squadron gets benched." Claire finally looked at him. Then you fly better. I can't, Whip said. The admission hung in the cold air. I ran the telemetry on your maneuver. I spent 8 hours in the pod last night trying to fly it. I blacked out twice. The G-onset is too violent. I don't have the muscle memory. You didn't just draw that maneuver on a whiteboard, Wraith. You flew it. Hearing the old call sign made her jaw tighten. She stared out at the pitch-black desert. That file is classified. I lied to a master sergeant to get it, Whip said smoothly. You passed your last physical evaluation 3 years ago. Your spine fused perfectly. The flight surgeon cleared you for high G maneuvers, but you never submitted the paperwork to the review board. Why? Because the Air Force doesn't put broken toys back in the box, Claire snapped, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You think Colonel Hayes is going to put a 38-year-old simulator tech in a $60 million jet because you have a bad feeling about a mock dogfight? Whip reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy steel keyring. Hanging from it was a red embroidered tag, "Remove before flight." He held it out. Hayes didn't have a choice, Whip said. I went to his office at midnight. I laid my wings on his desk. I told him I was medically unfit to fly today due to chronic fatigue. I grounded myself. Claire stared at the red tag. Her heart hammered a slow rhythm against her ribs. You threw away your slot. I told Hayes that if he wanted the squadron to pass, there was only one pilot who could fly the lead jet through that gorge, Whip continued. He woke up a 2-star general at the Pentagon. They pulled your file. They pulled your combat record. Whip grabbed her hand and pressed the tag into her palm. You're not a civilian contractor today, Major Danvers, Whip said. He took a step back and snapped a crisp salute. You're flight lead. Gear up. Wheels up at 0900. Claire stood alone in the hangar for a long time. The metal tag dug into her palm. She closed her eyes, breathed the fuel-soaked air, and turned toward the life support equipment room. The locker room smelled of talcum powder and stale sweat. She moved with mechanical precision, stripping off the civilian clothes. She pulled on the fire-resistant Nomex flight suit. The dark green fabric felt heavy. It felt like armor. She strapped the heavy bladders of the G-suit around her legs and abdomen, pulling the laces tight. The nylon rasped loudly. She picked up her scarred matte gray helmet, wiping a thin layer of grime off the dark visor. She walked out to the tarmac. An F-22 Raptor waited, low to the ground, a predatory wedge of titanium painted in ghost gray. The crew chief stood by the ladder, looking nervous. He had expected Captain Henderson. Instead, he got the quiet woman from the sim building, walking with a deliberate limp. He checked her rank insignia and snapped to attention. Ma'am, jet is fueled. She's all yours. Thank you, Chief. She climbed. Every step was an argument with gravity. She swung over the rail and dropped into the hard seat. The cramped cockpit fit her like a glove. She snapped the heavy metal buckles over her shoulders, pulling the straps brutally tight. She plugged her communication cord in and connected her mask. "Com check," Claire said. Her voice was a mechanical rasp over the radio. "Loud and clear, lead," came her new wingman's voice. The canopy hissed down, locking with a pressurized thud. The flight line noise vanished, replaced by the hum of avionics and her own breathing. She grasped the cold metal throttle and pushed it forward. Twin turbofan engines ignited. The airframe shuddered, vibrating up into Claire's spine. The ache flared, sharp and warning. She ignored it. She closed her eyes. I am not a ghost. Tower, Wraith 1-1. Flight of 2 ready for departure. Wraith 1-1. Cleared for takeoff. Give 'em hell, Major. Claire released the brakes and shoved the throttles to the firewall. The afterburners kicked in with a concussive boom. The acceleration was savage. It pinned her chest to the seat, forcing the breath from her lungs. The gray concrete blurred. At 160 knots, she pulled back gently on the side stick. The heavy metal beast detached from the earth. They punched through the cloud layer at 10,000 feet, the sky opening up into a blinding, endless blue. Claire felt the tension bleed out of her neck. The air up here was clean. It made sense. Down there, she was a broken woman pushing buttons in a concrete box. Up here, at Mach 1, she was a god of geometry and kinetic energy. Wraith flight, push tactical, Claire commanded, her voice cold and flat. 2, Cole replied. They entered the Nevada Test and Training Range. The radar warning receiver, RWR, immediately chirped, a high, nervous sound. They were being painted by long-range search radars. Keep it on the deck, too, Claire said. She rolled the F-22 inverted and pulled the nose down, dropping violently toward the jagged mountain peaks below. She leveled out at 500 feet above the desert floor, skimming the sagebrush. The airspeed indicator climbed past 600 knots. The world outside the canopy was a blur of brown and tan rock. Approaching the gorge, Cole said, his voice tight. This was the trap. Stay tucked in, 2. Do not deviate, Claire ordered. The rocky walls of the canyon swallowed them. The RWR went silent. The terrain was masking their signature. Claire watched her tactical display. The aggressors were up there, waiting. 3, 2, 1. Spike! Spike! 12 o'clock high! Cole yelled. The warning tone shrieked in Claire's headset. The aggressor had popped over the ridge, firing a simulated radar-guided missile straight down their throats. Break right, 2! Claire barked. Cole ripped his jet to the right, dumping flares. Claire didn't brake. She slammed the throttles forward and yanked the stick back into her lap. The jet went vertical. The G-forces hit her like a swinging vault door. 6 Gs, 7 Gs, 8. The blood drained from her head. Her vision tunneled into a tight gray straw. The G-suit rapidly inflated, crushing her legs and abdomen to force the blood back into her brain. Her spine screamed, a white-hot spike of agony driving through her fused vertebrae. She gritted her teeth, performing the anti-G straining maneuver, forcing short, explosive breaths past her lips. Hick, hick, hick. The airspeed bled off rapidly as she climbed straight up. The jet groaned, the airframe protesting the violent aerodynamic stress. On the radar, the aggressor, expecting her to turn horizontally, came screaming down the mountain at Mach 1.5, trying to adjust his angle. He was moving too fast. Claire chopped the throttles to idle. The F-22 hit the apex of the climb. It stopped, mid-air. It hung suspended in the thin atmosphere, a 30-ton piece of metal defying physics. The wind noise over the canopy went completely silent. It was a terrifying, beautiful moment of absolute stillness. The aggressor blew right past her underneath, a blur of blue and gray camouflage. Claire didn't hesitate. She jammed the stick forward and kicked the rudder. The F-22 whipped its nose down, gravity violently reclaiming the aircraft. She fed the throttles back in. The engines roared. She fell perfectly into the groove, sliding right onto the aggressor's 6 o'clock position. The targeting box snapped over the enemy jet. A solid, high-pitched tone filled Claire's helmet. A guaranteed kill. "Fox 2, Claire breathed into the mask. "Copy kill," the automated umpire voice clicked over the radio. "Aggressor 1, you are dead." Claire pulled out of the dive, skimming a mere 200 feet over the ridge. Her breathing was ragged, sweat stung her eyes, pooling in the silicone seal of her oxygen mask. Her back was on fire. She had never felt better. An hour later, the F-22 touched down on the Nellis runway. The tires chirped against the hot concrete. Claire taxied back to Hangar 4, popping the canopy as she rolled to a stop. The blast of hot Nevada air felt like a physical blow. She shut down the engines. The turbines spun down to a quiet whine. When she unstrapped and stood up in the cockpit, her left leg trembled violently. She had to grip the canopy rail to steady herself. She climbed down the ladder slowly. At the bottom stood the crew chief, a dozen mechanics, and Captain Liam Henderson. No one said a word. Claire reached the tarmac. Her boots hit the concrete. She unclipped her helmet and pulled it off, her hair plastered to her skull with sweat. She looked at Whip. Whip stepped forward. He didn't salute. He just held out his hand. "Nice flying, Major," Whip said quietly. Claire looked at his hand, then up at his face. The arrogance was entirely gone. In its place was the profound, quiet respect of a pilot who had just witnessed something impossible. She took his hand. Her grip was iron. "Don't leave your wingman, Captain," Claire said, her voice raspy from the dry oxygen. Whip nodded. "Never again, ma'am." Claire turned and walked toward the debriefing room. She still limped. But as the younger pilots watched her walk away, nobody saw a broken woman. They saw the apex predator of the Nevada sky. They saw the ghost, fully clothed in flesh, metal, and fire. If you love this story of resilience and hard-won respect, don't leave without hitting that like button. We bring you grounded, gritty, and deeply human dramas every single week. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss a flight. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that your past doesn't ground your future. Drop a comment below. Would you have the nerve to pull that maneuver? See you in the next story.